seen this raw strength only once before. It didn't scare me enough then. It does now.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one. There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
May the Force be with us.
My nerd world.
Just let it in.
Ojaba.
Why does she get a blaster and I don't?
Ojaba.
So, the last few times that I've watched The Last Jedi, and it's happened on Friday, I watched it Friday night, and we've got a routine in the Justice household on the weekends, and usually it involves a double feature on Friday and Saturday nights. So usually what happens is I end up sitting down with Melinda, and we watch a movie while we eat dinner, and then she usually departs to go hang with Kyle, and either they watch something or they go do something else, and she goes to bed pretty early, depending on the time. I'm a big NASCAR fan, so it's NASCAR season, so sometimes I'll go and I'll watch a NASCAR race that I had recorded or whatever. But this Friday, I went and I watched The Last Jedi, and it was because I love that movie, but largely because I caved this week. I have the Blu-ray coming. I'll just be honest with you. I can confess, right? We're all Star Wars fans here. We can admit we have a problem. It's episode 115 of the My Nerd World Star Wars podcast. I'm your host, Jon Justice. Thanks for checking it out. So I caved, and I got the digital download because I really wanted to watch the special features, and people were raving so much about the documentary, The Director and the Jedi, and I have no patience. And I happen to have some extra money on the Microsoft account, so that's the excuse that I'm using to go and purchase for that, considering the fact that I've now bought the movie twice. But it'll be easier if I'm on the Xbox and I just want to go and pop the movie in. I don't have to grab the Blu-ray. Yeah, I know, I'm awful. So, anyways, but here's my other justification, and then I'll actually move on to content. My other justification is I have Movie Pass, and so I saw the movie 10, 11 times in the theater, so Movie Pass subsidizes my movie experiences by allowing me to go see The Last Jedi as many times as I want for $10 a month. So, yeah. So I just took away a couple of movies that I didn't spend watching in the theater. Okay, so Friday, Last Jedi. I watched it Friday because of the fact that after watching The Director and the Jedi, I wanted to go and watch this movie again. And The Last Jedi it has this strange effect on me because I finished watching it on Friday night and I was like, cool, you know what? I'm going to take a break. I'm going to pump the brakes on watching this movie, and maybe, you know what? I'll wait until the Blu-ray arrives on the 27th. And then I'll watch it that Friday, or I'll watch it during the week. I'll give myself a week's reprieve. But I'm doing the show, I'm getting ready to prep for the show, and I'm doing my notes, and I'm just saying I want to go and watch that movie again. It's just such a special piece of art. It really is. So, for the show this week, this is what we're going to do. I want to talk a bit about the digital release. Not anything sort of bullet-pointed. I wrote down a bunch of notes while I was watching the documentary, The Director and the Jedi, for the show this week. So that's what I'm going to do, sort of my typical stream of consciousness with my loose outlines here of some of the observations that I made watching the deleted scenes, watching the documentary, some of the commentary. I have not listened to the commentary of the movie yet. Really looking forward to that. And then for the rest of the show, we're going to do listener feedback. So this is going to be another longer show this week, and I have one item in some audio that's non-Star Wars / Star Wars reference related, as it has to do with Ready Player One, which I'm really, really looking forward to. So Let's get into it for this week. I got a lot of thoughts on the digital release and watching The Director and the Jedi.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
Rian Johnson, in creating The Last Jedi, is a love letter to fans. When you get a love letter from somebody, right, most of the time, even if it's unrequited love, or, even if it's somebody who maybe you don't feel that same way about, it is something special. When somebody goes and takes the time to write down, to put it, I guess nowadays in an email, or to write it down, their feelings and their emotions in trying to reach out to you, right? It is a very special feeling, and it makes even if you don't particularly feel the same way and you have those conflicting emotions, you can't help but feel something, right? Some type of emotion. It may not be the equivalent or the same emotions of the person writing the love letter, but you're going to feel something. Well, that's what Rian Johnson did. He wrote a love letter to fans in creating this movie, and fans reacted appropriately. Some fans, like myself, embraced it and were more than happy to write love letters back in the form of podcasts that we do on a weekly basis, talking about how much we like this movie. Other people recoiled. I don't want your love letter. I don't feel about you that way, but you've elicited such an emotional response in me, I feel the need to say that you have destroyed my childhood, right? That's what good content does. It elicits an emotion and a response. I'll never forget the first night after seeing The Last Jedi, how I felt, and then seeing how all these other people felt too. People were really stunned. They really were taken aback, and even I was. I knew I liked it, but you get that love letter from somebody, you kind of got to read it a few times to really understand, right, what the person is trying to say to you. You may get an initial instinctive reaction, and that may be one plus or positive or negative, but a lot of times, using this example, you get that love letter, and even if you are glad that you got it, and you have a positive sort of emotional response, there still is a bit of confusion, especially if you weren't expecting it. And watching The Director and the Jedi, this documentary, which is it's an hour and a half, and it's just spectacular. I often get a little bit worried watching documentaries, and I love watching. I soak this stuff up. I love the background of the making of all this stuff. And it's inevitable that I'll be watching this going, oh, am I ruining my experience for the next time that I go and watch this? Am I going to be thinking about this? And it doesn't happen, because I allow, if you allow yourself to get immersed in the world when you watch the film, you can kind of push the making of aside. We're adults. We know that this stuff is fake. But you watch this documentary. They hired an actual documentary filmmaker to create this. Rian Johnson said, and it was funny because in an interview it sounded like a dig at J.J. Abrams. I don't think it was, but he did describe what the Force Awakens documentary was. And Rian Johnson came out and said, he's like, look, I don't want just a bunch of crew members and actors commenting on the movie with a bunch of B-roll footage. If we're going to make a documentary, I want to get an actual documentary filmmaker to shoot this and to craft it in a true documentary format. And that's what he did. The title, The Director and the Jedi, the core of this documentary is that conflict between Mark Hamill and Rian Johnson over the direction of Luke's character. It's not, how do I want to put it? That's the core of the documentary, even though it's only a part of the documentary. It's almost like they had this core of The Director and the Jedi at the heart of this insight into the making of The Last Jedi. We're going to give you this push and pull of Rian Johnson and and Mark Hamill over the direction that Luke Skywalker went. And then around it, we'll get into some of the details of how the movie was made. And it is really just fascinating insight. I'm a firm believer that everything happens for a reason. I don't think that you could have had anybody but Rian Johnson handle this material. Like, if you had somebody else who crafted the same story and the same direction for Luke Skywalker, and then it was directed by somebody different, I don't think they would have been able to convince Mark Hamill to do it. Rian Johnson seems like a very insecure person, and you get this in the documentary, while still standing by his belief of the way the story should go. And that's a very human thing to do. There are moments in this documentary with Rian Johnson where there's one particular moment where he's talking with Ron Bergman, his producer, and they're talking about the original alternate opening to the movie, which is available. It's really interesting too, what they had originally envisioned how the movie was going to open. And there's this brief conversation between Rian Johnson and Ron Bergman as they're sitting down, and Ryan's kind of second guessing himself. And he's not sure if he's doing the right thing in this particular moment in the scene and the way it plays out. And Rom's just like, you got to stick to what you're, to what you believe in moving forward. And that's clear. It's clear that Mark Hamill didn't agree with the way that Rian Johnson wanted to go, but he also committed to it, respected the director enough to go and give it his all, and he absolutely did, and created a beautiful performance. And no offense to Mark Hamill, he is an actor, right? I love Luke Skywalker as a character, and Mark Hamill as a person seems, generally speaking, like a really, really nice guy. But I've heard his opinion and views on certain things, like what they wanted to do in the original trilogy, and I didn't agree with any of those. He's an actor. He's not necessarily a storyteller. And I'm not one of these Uber fans that gets into the personal lives of these individuals because of the nature of what I do Monday through Friday on my regular job. I tend to try to push aside actors and actresses and their views of the world outside of what they do in Hollywood, just because that doesn't matter to me. I don't care what the political affiliation of Rian Johnson or Mark Hamill or Daisy Ridley or what. It doesn't matter to me. And so when they go and they make comments and stuff, like, I don't care. I only care about them as an actor and what they're able to portray. And if you watched The Last Jedi and didn't know the backstory that Mark Hamill didn't agree with Rian Johnson, you wouldn't have known that based off of how well Mark Hamill portrayed that character. But it endured me, that documentary endured me to Rian Johnson even more than I already was. It's so clear that he created a story and directed a movie and guided that movie doing what he genuinely wanted to do, while at the same time being very meticulous to the core of Star Wars, what Star Wars means to the fans, but he didn't let that influence what he created. And that's all that we as fans can ask for with the franchise being taken over by individuals that are not George Lucas. I agree with all the decisions that Rian Johnson made in The Last Jedi. And he took some big risks. He pushed some boundaries. And I'm glad that he did, because that will afford the opportunity for other creators to go and push boundaries. Canto Bight. There's a portion of Canto Bight where the costume creature designer is talking about Canto Bight and how when they originally envisioned it, he didn't think it was very Star Wars, talking about this casino planet and this casino world. But they went and created it anyways. It pushed the limits. It pushed the boundaries. And I have such utter respect for that. There's a portion of the extended father chase on Canto Bight which, by the way, you watch the deleted scene, that chase that we saw in the movie was like a third of how long that father chase was supposed to be when you see the pre-visualization and how far they'd actually gotten. And there's a scene during the chase where they fall through the roof of one of the buildings into this sauna, this hothouse. And this has been shown in a lot of the different behind-the-scenes footage, and I think it was actually featured in one of the in one of the photos that Entertainment Weekly ended up putting out. But there's Warwick Davis is in the movie, and he plays in this scene that was cut from the film. He plays this one-eyed little pink, like pig-looking thing. And I remember when the photo got out for Entertainment Weekly, people were zeroing in on that character and thinking it looked ridiculous, right? Oh, it's so silly, Cyclops, whatever. Did everybody forget there was a Cyclops in the cantina in A New Hope? I hear people complain about the lack of coloring in the aliens, and I think I've even complained about it, to be honest with you, if we're now that I probably have. I would like to see more original trilogy creatures in the prequel movies or in the sequel films. But I've heard people specifically complain that the aliens don't have enough color. There isn't a vibrant enough color palette to them. Again, I don't think people have gone back and looked at the aliens from the original trilogy all that close. I was looking at this group shot somebody had posted on Twitter of a handful of the Cantina aliens kind of together in like what looked like a yearbook photo, right? A group picture. They were all, tans and browns with very little color in it. So I'm getting off track here. I'm sorry. Pushing boundaries. That's what The Last Jedi does. It pushes the boundaries. The Force connections pushes the boundaries. Hearing them talk about the Force connection, right? It pushes the boundaries. It expands what we know the Force can do and what this world is going to be. The one thing that really, really stuck out to me, one of the things, because obviously many did, because I'm doing a show. One of the things that stuck out to me when you watch the behind-the-scenes footage and the documentaries and the director and the Jedi on with the release is how they use practical effects. And I have a very specific point here. There's always been something special about this movie since the first day I saw it. Okay. There's something that I found very endearing about The Last Jedi that I didn't necessarily about The Force Awakens, and certainly not the prequel trilogy. There was almost a simplicity isn't the right word. Maybe minimalist is the right word. And The Force Awakens did this too. But you compare The Last Jedi to the prequel trilogy, which I love. If you didn't know anything about when these movies were released, right? And it's a little tough to kind of put ourselves that far out to unlearn what we've learned so far. But if you put a movie like, say, Revenge of the Sith next to The Last Jedi, and you had somebody who wasn't as familiar with either film, and you asked them which one is the newer movie, my guess is going to be that they're going to land on Revenge of the Sith being the newer of the two movies. My point being is that Rian Johnson really did bring the feeling of Star Wars and the aesthetic of Star Wars back down to reality. We were so, and I don't think it's like this for all fans. I think it's going to be like this, at least for me being an older fan, right? Having seen A New Hope in the theater when I was 5 years old. We immersed ourselves into everything Star Wars when we were kids, and I have ever since I was a kid. Especially at a time when you didn't have the internet, you didn't have access to watch the movies all the time unless you got a VHS copy of it. We got the toys, but when the making of stuff came out and the magazines came out and the books came out, we soaked it all up like a sponge because we loved this world so much, and we learned so much about it, and we learned about all these practical effects. And how all these practical effects really grounded these movies in a sense of reality that we didn't even realize we were in the middle of, right? The practical effects. I mean, to the point where when they did the documentary stuff for The Force Awakens, they had the whole crux of the behind-the-scenes video was, real sets, practical effects. When the truth is, there was more CGI in The Force Awakens than there was combined in all three of the prequel movies. Now, the CGI is better now, so you notice it a lot in the prequel films. But when you look at the number of things that they did that were real and practical for The Last Jedi, the space cow, the sets, record number of sets, it clearly tapped into, for me, my psyche of real and tangible things. And it really, it heightens the feeling of the movie. It makes it makes it a Star Wars film and brings you deeper into the story, in my opinion, because there's less opportunity for you to be taken out of it. When you look at how practical it was with the Praetorian Guard, Ben and Rey fight on the Supremacy, I mean, it's no wonder that thing was shot so well and looked so great. There were so many real world things that were going on in that scene. And I think the prequel trilogy suffered from that. Right? The CGI wasn't quite there, and Lucas was pushing the boundaries of film. And I know we can get into story and the problem that people have with the story too. But I think a part of it was we were so used to those practical effects in the original trilogy that when you know something is CGI, you know something is CGI. The CGI has gotten better now, but I think Rian Johnson really even took a bigger step backwards to ground this movie in a sense of reality because of the practical effects. And it makes me actually appreciate some scenes even more. So scenes in the movie that I liked, I'm really loving now. Seeing the background on how they did the hut exploding scene after the finger touching, I mean, I love that moment now. And not to say I didn't before, but now that I'm watching this and I try not to let myself think about the fact that I know this is practical now, but there's something in the back of your head when I watch that scene now, and I just kind of go, wow, that is so powerful. It means so much. And the fact that it was real. If you haven't watched The Director and the Jedi, do it. You will not be disappointed. It really did bring a level of respect to Rian Johnson that I didn't think that it could go any higher, and it absolutely has. And it's gotten me so excited for what he's going to do with his own trilogy and the story he's going to tell, and to see him coming into his own as a director. When you look at the progression from Brick to The Brothers Bloom, which I enjoy, it's got its flaws. It's a little long. His movies are a little bit long. But I like some of the storytelling and the relationships in that to Looper. I love Looper and, of course, The Last Jedi. I think that he is just ready to hit his stride, and now that you were going to kick open the door and let him create his own Star Wars universe, it's going to be something that will be divisive, and I'm sure people will be somewhat turned off by it, but I still think that because of that, it's going to be something incredibly endearing, and I've mentioned this many times, and I'll mention it again. One of the best pieces of advice I was ever given from a consultant was be as authentic and as genuine as possible, and you'll reach the largest audience that you are capable of reaching. And that's what Rian Johnson did with The Last Jedi. He made it as authentic and as genuine as he possibly could within this box, this galaxy of Star Wars, and he found out the largest audience he's capable of reaching. And what I think is beautiful about it is that as time goes by, it's going to get even bigger. I think The Last Jedi is really going to cement itself as one of the best Star Wars movies ever, and a turning point for Star Wars. The Force Awakens was not a turning point for Star Wars. Rogue One was not a turning point for Star Wars. I don't think that, and for the future of the franchise, and I don't think Solo, a Star Wars story, is going to be, sort of a watershed moment. I think that The Last Jedi was. That was absolutely, that was a game changer for Star Wars and for the future of the franchise. And you're not going to be able to do that unless you go and you tick off some portion of the fandom, which Rian Johnson clearly did. All right, one more quick comment, and then we will get to listener feedback this week on The Director and the Jedi. And somebody had grabbed this and put it up online, and then I actually went and watched it in the documentary itself. But there was a retelling of the scene after the HUD explosion and the finger touching, when Rey and Luke end up duking it out, and Rey goes and knocks him down with her staff. In the version that got cut from the movie, And I was going to pull the audio, but it's really hard to hear because what we watch in the documentary is actually somebody filming a screen, right? It's not the actual deleted scene. But Luke, after she knocks him down, she says, "Did you do it? Did you create Kylo Ren?" And Luke says, "You opened yourself to the dark side for a pair of pretty eyes." Now, I'm glad that it was removed. I think it's better to leave a little bit of a question mark on motivations and feelings there, even though for those of us that see it, it's obvious. But for those that necessarily don't want to go that far, it doesn't need to be spelled out for them. This would have been spelling out Reylo to say you opened yourself to the dark side for a pair of pretty eyes. But it does get you into that mindset of Rian Johnson and where he was going in his head. I think that's pretty clear now. I mean, you go back to the previous episode and the novel spoilers, right? There's no doubt this is beyond just a, hey, you're cool. This is a, no, I'm kind of attracted to you. And I said I wanted you to put that cowl on, but I kind of really didn't. And Kylo Ren, Rey saying, can we not do this right now? And Kylo saying, yeah, I wish we couldn't. Yeah, you know what? If you're Kylo Ren, you're cool with that. You were just able to show off how buff you were to the girl you're going after without even having to try. So don't even try to fake it for a moment. All right, so let's get into your listener feedback for this week, episode 115 of the My Nerd World Star Wars podcast.
There has been an awakening. Have you felt it?
I have one more news item to share and some audio at the end of the show. It's Star Wars related, but not directly related to the film, so I'll explain coming up in a moment. But I want to get into listener feedback, and thanks to everybody who has dropped a comment, left an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com. As I mentioned at the start of the show, there is a Twitter now, at the My Nerd World, at the My Nerd World, and also the My Nerd World Facebook page. Not a whole lot going on the Facebook page yet. We will be using that as time goes by and as I continue to build up the Twitter handle as well. But follow me on Twitter. It'd be great to get as many of the podcast listeners on Twitter so we can converse back and forth and I can get more comments from you that way as well. So let's get right into the listener feedback, and we'll start off with a friend of the show, Ben, writes in, talkshownerd@gmail.com, and says, I too loved The Last Jedi. I wasn't sure why that movie got so much more hate than The Force Awakens. It was by far a better movie. I really like The Force Awakens, though. I had a thought. The reason why people are not digging these movies is that the expectation is to a level where there is no movie that could easily satisfy them, right? That could satisfy them. When you have something that's as big as Star Wars and is able to stay as big as Star Wars for 40 years with only a handful of movies to show, how do you live up with that? Well, I thought that JJ and Ryan did a stinking good job. Anyways, just wanted to let you know that and have a great day. He does a PS here and says, an Old Republic trilogy would be cool, but I bet, I'm assuming he's referring to Rian Johnson, he goes in a different direction. Yeah, and they've been very specific to say that Rian Johnson is developing a trilogy outside of anything that we've encountered before. And I personally believe that also includes the former Expanded Universe, the now Legends category as well. If anybody's doing Old Republic, it's either going to be the series of movies that the Game of Thrones guys are doing, or it's going to end up being what the TV show ends up being about that Jon Favreau is a part of. Look, art is subjective, and I do believe that Ben has a point there when it comes to expectation. We forget that going into The Force Awakens, if you had told fans going into The Force Awakens, and several of us knew ahead of time that you were going to get a couple of minutes with Luke Skywalker and he wasn't going to speak at all, there would have been a lot of frustration. And there was a lot of frustration pre-release when that info got out there. I mean, to the point where there were people that knew and still had a hard time accepting that was going to be the case. But you go back and you look at the response to The Force Awakens, and everybody was cool with it. Luke Skywalker was a presence throughout that entire film. And so everybody was fine with the way they handled it, and they knew we'd be getting Luke Skywalker in Episode 8, right? And going back to what I mentioned in the core of the show commentary this week, Rian Johnson created something that was unique to him. He put his personal stamp on it. He saw the story going a certain way, and Disney trusted him to do that. I think, in the long run, that's going to serve to benefit The Last Jedi in ways that people don't even imagine right now. But, to what Ben was saying, he's right. The expectation that people had for Luke Skywalker, a lot of fans wanted to see a butt-kicking Luke Skywalker, and that wasn't the way that Rian Johnson chose to go, and not everybody agrees with that. I absolutely appreciated that. To me, that's the more realistic and interesting story. Way more interesting than seeing Luke being the kick-butt Jedi. You do see that at the end of The Last Jedi, though. I mean, it does come to full realization, and all the choices that Luke makes, to me, echo the fact that he is an amazing Jedi, that he makes the choices that he makes at the end of that film. All right, let's get to some more listener feedback. Amanda writes in, like you, I am a Reylo and found the relationship between Ben and Rey in The Last Jedi truly powerful. I've been thinking over Star Wars The Last Jedi, and I think it's deeply misunderstood. And I was wondering if I could get your opinion on the following. Feel free to cherry pick this. Bolded ideas to make it easier. Of course, I cut and pasted and I didn't end it up. I lost the bold marks, but we'll just work through Amanda's email here. Star Wars is about the maturation of the young heroes, right? To me, the biggest theme of The Last Jedi is the need of true intimacy. Kylo's even been called a monster by his parents. All he wants is acceptance. The only person who showed him attention and false affirmation was the Predator, Snoke. Rey just wants parents, a dad to tell her that she's worth something, which is a reason many girls chase after boys, that need for affirmation and worth. To me, even the fact that Andy Serkis based Snoke after Hugh Hefner, who made porn, for lack of a better word, easily accessible, is a key to understanding this. Any addiction, even adult, is a way to fill that need of intimacy that both men and women need. Many say The Last Jedi is a feminist agenda and representation. I see women asking men to be the heroes, teachers, and leaders they are designed to be. Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You are my only hope. Poe, stop chasing glory and instead value life and protect the light. Finn, stop running and be the hero. Kylo, power and controlling others will not give you affirmation that you seek. Killing the past won't heal you, only forgiving it can. The Last Jedi is a call for men and women to work together for this galaxy, since they are the co-heirs of the story. Intimacy and restoration of the masculine and feminine working together accomplishes much. See what happens when Ben and Rey work together, and then she lands on a smiley face. I heart that email so much. And I agree with a lot of the points that Amanda makes. Rian Johnson set out in The Last Jedi to put these characters through the most difficult challenges that they could go through, right? That was his, and he said that. I mean, that was directly he said. That's the movie he wanted to make. You know, and I mentioned this on last week's show. When you go back and watch The Last Jedi, it's The Force Awakens, you could easily see why Rian Johnson chose to go down the road that he chose to go down, finding Rey and Kylo being the most interesting characters from those movies. J.J. Abrams really just kind of teed it up, and that's what Rian Johnson ended up zeroing in on. I think that Amanda makes a lot of great points about people searching for intimacy and trying to find it in various places, and in trying to find it, you have Kylo / Ben and Rey ending up finding it in each other, only to be pulled apart again because they're two opposite ends of the spectrum. Rian Johnson said in some of the making of, right? These are dual protagonists in this movie. The point that I want to make to what Amanda was saying, and sort of add to it, is that these things sort of happen naturally, right? Ray wants parents, a dad and mom, to tell her something, which is a reason many girls chase after boys, that affirmation and need. The way that Rian Johnson crafted these characters, and because of their background, these things all happened very, very naturally, right? The desire for intimacy sort of takes shape without even trying when you are creating a story based off these two characters and what their backgrounds already are. And if I'm reading into what Amanda is saying, then Amanda, please write in and correct me. But I do agree with this. She makes a comment in the email about the sort of feminist agenda and representation. See, you can read into it whatever you want. I like to see it not as that, but I see that as sort of real world scenarios. Dudes have emotions and feelings too. Some guys hide it better than others and keep it inside better than others, but these ideas of masculinity and manliness, we all deal with the same emotions and feelings. And it's the same thing when it comes to women and how they relate to men, and men and how they relate to women. We kind of are who we are. And when you take these two characters and you put them in the situation that they are currently in, based off their background, like I said, it's clear that they do desire intimacy with one another. And I mentioned before that if you look at the background of both these characters, there's a good argument to be made that they haven't had any good relationships where they've been able to experience these types of feelings and emotions at an earlier age. So it makes sense that a scene like the finger-touching scene, Rian Johnson saying, as he did in an interview, that's the closest that we will ever get to a love scene in a Star Wars movie, because there is real intimacy there. And I do believe that that's why a lot of people ended up having a hard time with the story, is because they didn't necessarily want to see Star Wars go that particular way. That article that was written about why romance never works in Star Wars, it's a bunch of gobbledygook. It works in Star Wars if you let it work in Star Wars and you accept it. I happen to like that. I can relate to that. Rian Johnson talked at length about making, like, Darth Vader was a fantastic villain, but he wasn't exactly relatable. With Kylo Ren, you can see he's relatable. There's parts of Rey that are relatable. And we talk so much right now within the fandom of movies outside of Star Wars and in Star Wars of diversity and representation. It's always been, for me, an emotional representation. I don't relate to a character because they look like me. I don't even relate to a character just because they're a man. You can relate to I relate to a character because of their circumstances, because of the emotions and the things that they're dealing with. So there are parts of Rey's character that I can relate with, and there's parts of Kylo's character that I can relate with. And I think for the majority, and most of us can relate to this idea that we need contact with people. We need to have intimacy with someone. It's, man was not, women were not, man was not meant to be alone. All right, so I'm wiping out on Amanda's email because I loved it so much. Let's get to some more other comments, though. Sue writes in, it seems to me the balance and harmony can only be achieved by the union of Rey and Ben. Ben, not Kylo, if you get my point. I'm all for redemption of Kylo and a typical fairy tale ending, and love conquers all. Then 10 years from now, I can sit down with the grandkids and watch a whole new take. Again, if I'm a gambling man, I think JJ is going to go there. I think that Rian Johnson teed up J.J. Abrams to cap off the story and Rey and Ben's relationship in such a way that it's going to be very emotionally satisfying, while also continuing to split the fandom. And you know what? I don't care. All right, Colleen Falk writes, can't wait for the digital release. This was obviously before this week. So much to look forward to with this. This is my refuge from the Last Jedi haters and their toxicity. Thanks for your positive posts and enthusiasm. Well, thank you, Colleen, for the message. I really appreciate it. Jennifer writes, if anyone still wonders if Reylo is essential to this trilogy, just listen to the music that was chosen once their hands touch. I just caught it this time at home on Digtal after noticing at the 3 times in the theater. Star Wars would never play that unless Ben and Rey together is the direction that it's headed. Globe Trying Tiffers writes, the last few minutes, reference to last week's show, the last few minutes of your show made listening to the whole thing worth it. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed the entire discussion, as I do every week, but I particularly loved your thoughts on the foreshadowing of how Kylo Ren / Ben in The Force Awakens was not trying to kill Rey during their epic fight, but was already trying to convince her to join him. And that enriched the progression of their story in The Last Jedi. It made me smile ear to ear. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and for bringing an optimism and brightness to my life every week. Love it. Thank you, Globetrotting Tiffers. I really appreciate that. Elle writes, favorite podcast ever, and not just because you responded to my comment. This was from last week as well. Thank you. When it comes to Rey changing her look, and this goes back to several podcasts ago where I spent an inordinate amount of time talking about Rey putting her hair down. My guess is there wasn't a big discussion. Everyone on the production from Rian on down is just really well versed in cinematic shorthand. I'll bet that Rian put in the script that Rey's hair comes undone in the water and that she looked like a princess in the escape pod, and everybody got the picture. You could also argue that Rey was, however unconsciously, leaving behind her little girl hair because she was slowly accepting that her parents were never going to look for her. But when you group the looser hair with the makeup and the long drapey scarves on her throne room costume, the most feminine dress-like thing they can reasonably put on her, I think it's about Reylo. That episode, I remember I was talking about how she puts her hair down for the first time when she goes off to meet with Kylo on the Supremacy, and now suddenly I want to be watching the movie again. And I made the point that I thought that was the first time it happened, and going back and looking at some of the pictures before watching the film again, I realized, no, she actually puts it down prior to that. It doesn't come down naturally prior. I mean, it comes down naturally, not intentionally prior to that. Prior to when she leaves, it is because she has that confrontation with Luke in the rain after falling into the dark side cave, and so it's like she goes through her trials, and it's through her trials her hair comes down, and then she's committed to it by the time she leaves to go see Ben on the Supremacy. Chris writes, she definitely blew out her hair, applied a little makeup, and put on a nice outfit, and traipsed her little bad self over to her new boyfriend's house. I think Kylo might have had a stormtrooper clean the bathroom and change the sheets in his chamber, too. In his chamber. Too bad he didn't take his glove off before the proposal, or he might have had better luck. It worked last time. You know what? I know he's being glib, but that's the relatability factor, right? What Chris did right there goes back to making the characters relatable and how he drew from real-world experiences, because us dudes, especially me, during the single dark years, were absolutely like that. That's just how men and women deal with one another. And the one thing, too, going back and I watched, when did I watch it? Friday night? Friday night I watched Last Jedi again? Watched it on Friday night, and it was funny because in it, and after watching the director and the Jedi, I landed on something that I hadn't really thought about all that much, and that was he does wipe out the majority of students at the academy, right before he leaves. After his Ben does, Kylo, after his altercation with Luke. So you really do have a mirroring in even ways that I hadn't outwardly said yet. You really do have a mirroring to Anakin Skywalker in the prequel trilogy and killing of the younglings. Okay, so why do I bring it up in reference to what Chris is saying? I bring it up in reference to what Chris was saying is because we kind of forget about all that by the time we get to Rey and to Kylo in the finger touching scene, and then certainly during the proposal as he puts forward on the supremacy. As somebody who is a hopeless romantic at heart and knows that we're watching something that's been created for our enjoyment and isn't entrenched in real world scenarios, right? In real world scenarios, Kylo Ren is unredeemable, and he goes to jail and probably gets the death penalty for his horrible crimes. In the Star Wars universe, we just kind of look past all that, which is fine, right? That's what makes it fun. But Rian Johnson does a fantastic job of placing us in the shoes of these characters, Rey, so that we can accept and be okay and even consider the fact that these two might end up joining together, despite the horrible crimes that Kylo has committed. And of course, you can rationalize that away by talking about how he isn't all that mature, and he hasn't matured when it comes to dealing with the relationships and even as a person based off of his background, and that he's been horribly influenced by this Snoke character. And there's real-world scenarios that I won't mention on the show, but you know what I'm talking about, of certain singular individuals that have been able to influence other individuals to go and do their bidding for them. We can make that logical jump and that leap. And that's one of the things that I really, really applaud Rian Johnson for, because I didn't know how he was going to be able to pull that off based off of what we knew about Kylo Ren coming out of The Force Awakens, and he absolutely did. I love watching that Hutt scene, and these two individuals, despite their problems and their obvious baggage, who need something, and maybe they can find it in each other, and maybe in the next movie they actually will. All right, let's see. Misconduct writes, I think I'll wait to write thoughts and comments about speculation territory until I'm finished reading the novelization and Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces. I just finished Joseph Campbell and the Power of the Myth, and a lot of very interesting parallels in it in regards to what we are seeing with the sequel trilogy. I highly recommend checking it out, John. It's fascinating. The audiobook is incredible. It's basically a conversation with Joseph that was recorded at Skywalker Ranch, and he does talk about Star Wars in the conversation. This is the Joseph Campbell connection, the hero's journey, and what Rian Johnson did. And this you can kind of lay this on top of the conversation prior to getting to the listener feedback this week about what makes The Last Jedi special and unique, and in my opinion, attaches to that original trilogy, especially when you go back and look at the director and the Jedi and how many sets they created and how much of what they created was real and how our brains know that it's real. Rian Johnson is, to me, a better student of Lucas and Campbell than J.J. Abrams was. That's not to dismiss The Force Awakens by any stretch at all. And it really is a lot in the same way that Lucas sort of set up A New Hope. We just kind of dip our toes into the Force. We get the core messaging, but we don't get really deep into the characters and the backstories and the background until we get into The Empire Strikes Back. And The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi both do the same thing. And it really takes it deeper. And it gives you better meaning. And so with what Misconduct 1 was saying, right, in Joseph Campbell, that's why I really, really find myself drawn to The Last Jedi, is because we do get a different but the same view of the Force, and we do get Rian Johnson playing in that Joseph Campbell world of myth building more than J.J. Abrams did. All right, Junebug writes, I'm not expecting a full-blown romance between Kylo and Rey in Episode 9. Though I wouldn't be opposed if they did it, if it did happen. However, it would be sadder indeed if they killed off Ben/Kylo Ren, presumably the last living Solo and Skywalker. So Han and Leia were like failures as parental figures to him. Anakin ultimately failed to bring balance to the Force, so what's left? I hope it doesn't end where the Skywalker ends in failure too. This is and that's the last comment for this week, and then I'll get to my one other item for the show this week, and we'll wrap up. Somebody made this, and it was one of I think it was CT on the Who Talks First podcast, which I really, really enjoy. Made the comment that if you don't have the redemption of Kylo Ren, then it makes him killing his father pointless. And I agree with that. To me, the question in Episode 9 is going to come down to how is that obviously going to happen? I don't think that 9 is going to end up with a full-blown baddie Kylo Ren being taken out by Rey without some redemption being applied. The question is just surrounding whether or not that redemption means does he live and he goes off by himself after being redeemed? Does he live and he and Rey end up joining together? Does he live? And these are all based off of the idea that he has to be redeemed somehow, right? Does he get redeemed, but we lose both Rey and Kylo in the process, right? Does he get redeemed and die? That's going to be the question. That's the thing that I don't want to know going into Episode 9. I don't want to know how that plays out until I go and I see the movie. But I do agree, and I think most people will admit that they'd have to do something pretty incredible if they don't redeem Kylo Ren to bring everything full circle again. And look, J.J. Abrams has said that he wants to tie the whole trilogy together. I am not going to marry this idea because I don't want to be disappointed, but the idea that we bring back Hayden Christensen as a Force ghost, that he's the one, maybe along with Ewan McGregor and Obi-Wan as a Force ghost, that tried to go along with Rey to point Kylo Ren in the right direction, and thusly at the end of the movie, he ends up helping to save the day, thus redeeming himself. And then again, that question comes up: what happens after that? And I really do not have a strong opinion on whether or not I want Rey and Kylo to get together, whether I want Kylo Ren to have to die. I really don't know. I'm going to go in with fresh eyes and ears into Episode 9 and just see what J.J. Abrams goes and decides to do. But when they talk about tying all these movies together, I think there has to be an element of going back to what J.J. Abrams started with. I will finish what you started with his grandfather. To me, how powerful would it be to have the grandfather actually show up in some way, shape, or form, an Anakin Skywalker, to tell him there's still time. You know, I was redeemed. You can be redeemed. I can't wait to see how that goes and that plays out. But again, unless you have Kylo redeemed, I don't know how you justify the death of Han Solo unless you do that. Or, and again, the Skywalkers, to the point of the comment, if you don't have Kylo redeemed, then the Skywalkers are kind of just like a lineage of failures. Well, that's not true, because Luke at the end wasn't a peace and purpose. Luke wasn't a failure at the end. And maybe if they don't redeem Kylo, that ends up being the sort of linchpin is what Luke did. Oh, I can't wait. All right, so really long show this week. So one more item before we go and wrap things up that I wanted to share with you.
My Nerd World.
I cannot wait for Ready Player One. I've read the book. The trailers have got me sold. I am so excited for this movie, right? This is a movie built for nerds, right? Look, a movie like Ready Player One is the equivalent of what Ernie Klein wrote in that book of sort of being the love letter to geekdom. In as much as I said on the show this week, Rian Johnson and the Last Jedi, in my opinion, is a love letter to the fans, right? You just don't always want to get that love letter. So the big question mark was, and I'm using that term a lot, it's a crutch now. There was a lot of questions about how are they going to go and make Ready Player One. For those that don't know, Ready Player One is filled with pop culture references. It's just as a geek and as a nerd, it was such a fun read. And I remember finishing it going, I can't wait for the movie whenever it happens, but I don't know how in the Sam heck they're going to be able to go in and pull this off. Well, it turns out they were actually able to go and get a lot of the licensing rights for a bunch of stuff that many of us fans thought they were never going to be able to go and do. There was an article that came out that said that Disney and Lucasfilm denied Steven Spielberg the opportunity to use anything relating to Star Wars. And it turns out in a recent interview with Steven Spielberg, that is not the case. So what I have here is a quick 1-minute clip of Steven Spielberg talking about Ready Player One and what he was able to get his hands on when it comes to the Star Wars universe.
It was difficult because we were greedy about wanting so many cultural references throughout the 80s and 90s. But everybody cooperated. We got Fox and 20th Century Fox and Universal and Paramount and Sony and Disney. Everybody basically came on board to help us take their IPs and put some of their and allow us to create Easter eggs from their own cultural phenomenons. Yeah. And so so if you look very carefully, you'll see an R2-D2 somewhere, you'll see an X-wing somewhere. But we didn't want to use the main cultural icons from any of the Disney Star Wars films because those are ongoing. That's really part of our contemporary world right now. And even though it began in the 80s, it is so much a part of our real life today in the 21st century. So we asked for some of the smaller items, and Disney gave us everything we asked for.
I cannot wait for this movie. I'm the kind of movie watcher now where if I'm not watching something new, I really am watching something based on whatever mood that I'm in that I want to get into, right? And especially when I go to the theater and I see a movie, that I enjoy, I want to go home and I can't watch that movie again, but I want to watch something that reminds me of that movie. If you watch Seinfeld and the bit with George Costanza where he talks about how he dresses for mood, I watch movies for mood, right? Like we went and saw Tomb Raider, which I actually really enjoyed. I thought Alicia Vikander did a fantastic job as an action star. She's just fun to watch, and she's on screen during the whole thing. And they handled it really well. It was just a fun action movie. But when I got home on Friday after seeing it, I wanted to watch something along those lines and was tempted to go and watch the original Tomb Raiders, and I didn't. My point being, when it comes to Ready Player One is going to serve that need for me and my geekdom when I go to the theater and I watch something and I want to come home and I want to, watch something similar. Ready Player One is going to be so filled with references that it's going to be my immediate go-to, and I'm just so excited for this movie. We've got a Ready Player One coming up. Infinity War. I like the Marvel movies, and I'm just going to geek out on movies for a minute. I like the Marvel movies. Superhero movies are down a notch when it comes from Star Wars. And then, of course, Han Solo, and I firmly believe that we'll be getting a full trailer here in very short order. There's a couple of people who are very well known on Twitter, who are very credible, who have come out and said that they've done some screenings, and the people that have seen the Han Solo movie, the Solo A Star Wars Story, say that it's actually really, really good. So I'm getting super excited for it. All right, thanks again so much for checking out the show this week. Again, if you're on Twitter, find @TheMyNerdWorld and give me a follow. I'm going to be using that, building up that particular Twitter page along with the Facebook as well. You can find it, My Nerd World, on Facebook. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com is the email. Leave a comment on YouTube, and you can find the show on YouTube, iTunes, Podbean, Spreaker, Stitcher, and wherever you go and download it on your phone. So we'll be back again next week. Thanks for checking out the show this week. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.